Let's start with key factors to consider when pricing a sign project and thinking here about competitiveness and profitability. So what would you say are the key factors sign
Well,
makers need to
I think
consider?
one of these things is it kind of depends on the project, because if it's a tender process, you don't really have the opportunity to
Right.
talk that much with the client. It might sound a little bit odd because you've got to go
Mm.
through a process to get onto the list. With your small to medium sized companies, often there's not the projects you're involved with. You've been invited in to look at the project. So you might be onto an industrial estate, it might be the building. It's understanding the client's budget, and it's always something that I get a pushback on. Oh, no one's going to share the budget because they don't want to give you an idea of how much money they've got to spend. But you need to
Mm.
understand whether they've got the budget for a Mini or a budget for a Rolls Royce. And I
Mhm.
kind of use
Yeah.
that analogy because you walk in, and I've done it in my early days, walked onto an industrial estate, and you think, oh, the money that must have been spent, mirrored windows, powder coated frames, absolutely immaculate. You come up with a concept, all singing, all dancing, wayfinding system, and all of a sudden the customer, I haven't got that much money to spend just because I didn't
Mm.
ask at the outset to get an
Mm.
understanding of what they're after. So
Mm.
I suppose that creating a relationship with your client from the outset, and obviously if it's a new client, that's a
Yeah.
little bit more tricky, but understanding, taking the brief, walking the
Yeah.
client through what their expectations are is probably the major starting point. Because then you can
Mhm.
actually look at what materials actually are available to actually fulfill the client's needs. And again,
Mm.
I'll use that as an analogy because actually pre-COVID, I could more or less get hold of any materials I wanted at any time, and actually on a
Mm.
just-in-time basis. Now a lot of
Mm.
suppliers aren't actually holding the stock levels that they did. So you look at a project and you're working. Maybe you've won the project not based on price but on a time frame. Now I can't meet that time frame, and I'm having to pay extra carriage costs or shipping, or actually,
Mm.
or I can't get the product from
Mm.
my preferred supplier. So I'm not getting the
Mm.
discount structure that I have in place with my supplier, and having to pay over the odds. So I might be paying 10, 15, 20, 25, 50% more than I would do normally. All of a sudden,
Mm.
my profit margins are being eaten into.
So would you say then, as part of a pricing strategy, you need to have a really good understanding of what materials are going into your final product, and then to be
Yeah,
able to sort of guide the client on what,
exactly.
matching their expectations?
Yeah, and it could be it ties in with what they've already got. It could be the fact that they're looking for a
Mm.
complete fresh rebrand, and you
Mm.
can suggest materials that are actually suitable. And
Mm.
and and that's what I'm coming back to. You know, as you evolve in your sign business, you will have a number of key suppliers that you work with who will work with you on the materials that are actually available. And obviously, they're the ones
Mm.
that you get the heavier discounts on for yourself. Therefore, you've got the
Mm.
ability to mark them up a little bit more perhaps than you would product from other places. So again, this margin thing that we keep getting pushed on. And again,
Mm.
we're all in business to make a living. The old
So
phrase.
it's so it's knowing that the different materials where they come, but it's also having relationships with those different suppliers.
Exactly, exactly. And again, the good
Mm.
relationship with the supplier will allow you to understand what materials are available. They can give you an
Mm.
inclination of what's coming down the chain. If there's, an aluminium shortage, or some of the composite materials, we've had issues over the years with the fabrication, or there's been issues with them as well. So having that relationship with a supplier, you're going to get an honest
Mm.
appraisal of the availability of product that you're looking to bring in.
Mm. Okay, that's really interesting. And so, have you seen shifts in pricing strategies, thinking about rising material costs or supply chain challenges? I mean, we hear a lot all the time about both those two things.
Yeah,
Any shifts?
everything has gone up. Everything has gone and
Mm.
whereas again, and I go the good old days, you used to see a price increase once a year. Now, kind of
Mm.
some of the materials you're seeing it on a weekly/monthly basis. So things actually
Mm.
move, and that's a real issue.
Mm.
So giving a
Mm.
giving a client a price list on product has become a lot more tricky, should we say, over a period, because
Mm.
again, prices can move quite dramatically over a
Mm.
12-month period. And again, who's paying the difference? Well, if you've given a fixed price contract, you're the one who's actually sucking up the,
Mm.
the difference, and all of a sudden it's your margins that are eaten into again. So
Are
again,
people giving it fixed price?
well,
Are they
on a
taking
tendering process,
contracts?
that's often the way you win a tender based
You have to.
on and it might be the fact it's over a multi-site project, so that might be running
Mhm.
for 12, 18 months. And we've had contracts in the past that have been 3, 4 years for vehicle graphics, as a fleet will be
Mm.
enhanced. Not quite as dramatic because the vinyl doesn't tend to step up into quite as large a chunk as some of the
Mhm.
raw materials, but they still move.
Mm. So does that come down again to really understanding the supply chain, the relationships with the suppliers, so that if there is movement, you can sort of anticipate that movement in a fixed price, so you've got wiggle room.
And again, I think it's having that
Mm.
conversation fairly on in the contract.
Mm.
And again, you'll
Mm.
see now people when they offer a price, most I say most, not all, because again, I see some people don't even offer terms and conditions, but you will actually say that your quote is valid for a certain period of
Mm.
time, and it might
Mm.
actually be your quote is valid for 30 days. Now, that might sound a
Mm.
really small thing, but I still see sign companies,
Mm.
especially the smaller sign companies, who don't have a fixed term for that price.
Mm.
So if someone comes back 6 months
Okay.
later and your materials have moved 25%,
Yeah.
where do you go?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a really good, that brings us on to common pricing mistakes. So that would be one of them.
Yeah,
Any other pricing
yeah.
mistakes that you see and how to sort of avoid them? Hundreds.
One I see all of one of the ones I see all of the time is actually I'll buy a product in for £105, and I'll round
Mm.
that down, I'll mark it and
Oh,
put markup,
random.
and I'll just round it down. I'll keep rounding everything I brought buy in. I round down to a nice even number, and then at the end of it, I've got this nice price. And actually, it's still come in just over it was just over £1,000. So I round that down to £999. I'm just giving an exaggeration here. You've discounted right the way across the product, and then you've discounted down at the end. So again, it's just these small chunks that to get taken out of your margin. Now, pricing software
Mm.
hopefully stops you from doing that because you can see as
Hmm.
you work through the pricing. But I still see a lot of people who will still go longhand when they're doing one-off projects. So I know what
Mm.
I know what my seller will do, so I'll just put a markup on that product. To me,
Mm.
buying something that's £99 99 pence sounds a very false price. Buying something
Yeah.
for yeah, £105
Yeah.
and 44 pence. Oh, that actually
Yeah.
sounds as though that's an exact. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it's in your psyche, and we're told in sales training that you need to kind of stop barriers. And I sometimes think those barriers make people make those mistakes. The other thing that we often see is that the
Mm.
people don't read the instruction well. And one of the common
Mm.
mistakes, double-sided signs was one I always used to come from, a hanging sign. So someone
Mm.
prices the graphics up for one side of a double-sided sign.
Ah, okay.
It's a rookie mistake, and you only make it once or twice. And if
Right.
someone makes it more than twice, they probably aren't in the right job. And
Yeah.
the other big mistake is probably either getting your quote in too slow or too quickly.
Right.
I don't want my quote to be the first one in. Actually,
Right.
if I'm in the second or third quote, I can have a bit of a conversation to understand where I am in the pitching order. How does my price
Yeah.
compare? How do the materials compare? And it gives me an opportunity to explain why my price is what it is. Because again, we do all of that
Mm.
work and we don't follow up until we're desperate to get the answer. Well, make it part of the sales process.
How would you know if you're going in too quickly or too slowly?
I'm amazed when I watch people go into a sales process. They've done all the legwork to get into the door, and they're almost
Mhm.
desperate to get away again. Well, actually,
Right, yeah.
I want to
Close
create a
it down. Yeah.
relationship. Yeah. So
Yeah.
let me understand when you need the quote by.
Yeah.
I'll send you the quote. Explain what you're going to. I'm going to send you the quote, and then I'll give you a follow
Mm.
up call to make sure that you understand
Mm.
what's there. Now, most
Mm.
buyers will probably try and give you a bit of a pushback, and I think that's reason.
Mm.
No, I just want to make sure, especially if it's the first time we've dealt with you, that we go through the
Mm.
process. You understand why I've quoted these
Mm.
particular materials. It might not be like for
Mm.
like. I want to make sure what I'm giving
Mm.
you is like for like, and in
Yeah.
effect, they're buying your experience. So
Mm.
if you explain why you're giving the call, it's not
Yeah.
just to get the orders, to make sure that the client is getting the best service they can and the best materials for the job that they actually are asking you to do.
Yeah.
That's partly what they're paying you for. They're paying for your expertise. I'm still a great believer people
Mm.
by people.
Yeah. How should sign makers factor in things like installation, maintenance, long-term durability, all of those kind of factors? They're not just making the sign, but the everything else that goes with it.
Yeah, a lot of software companies don't want the maintenance. If they're
Right.
honest,
Hmm.
the ones that do, if the complete package, if you like,
Yeah.
some of the bigger sign companies is part and parcel, because obviously you're building in, the next round of signage at the end of the signage
Yeah.
life. Well, you've been maintaining it. Why wouldn't they let you do the next round? So
Yeah.
there's certainly a logic there. But the fitting of the sign brings a whole new skill set, and some of the smaller companies will subcontract some of that work out, so that you can understand why they don't necessarily want the maintenance, because they're having to bring somebody else in to do that work. But you can also
Hmm.
make the client aware of the things that they should be looking for. So we talk about, adverse weather conditions, checking the sign on a regular basis. Once the sign's on the building, it's the client's responsibility. It's the client's responsibility. It becomes part of the fabric of the building. So it's part of their own insurance, if you like, of the building. So then doing a visual inspection is just, for me, is just common sense. But if you don't let them know from the
Hmm.
outset that they should be looking at it, why would they? So it's again that education process.
Yes, it comes
Actually,
back to asking the right questions to
yeah,
really understand what they're looking for, but also forming the relationship to give them advice and your expertise, as you say,
yeah.
knowledge around what needs to happen.
Well, we've even had it where we had a particular client that was, fastidious about the upkeep of his building, and actually was saying, well, how do we keep the sign maintained? Well, so who's cleaning your building? Well, the window cleaner does that, and he washes it. Well, why not ask him just to, clean the sign down? And it was just a conversation. Oh, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. So there's
Mm,
certainly opportunities on
mm,
maintenance and upkeep of signage. It's just actually
mm.
people having the confidence to actually charge for it.
Do you yourself see value in standardizing pricing models across the industry, or should the businesses remain very flexible, dependent on the project scope?
I I'd be reluctant to have fixed prices for someone, even in a franchise network. A franchisee will charge differently in the north to the south. Again, all our overheads are different. I'm in a unit 1,500 square feet, or I'm in a
Yeah,
40,000, 1,000 foot
yeah,
premises. And I've
yeah.
got 100 staff. I've got 2 staff. My overheads are completely different.
It's like you was saying earlier about the supplier relationships. You have those relationships, then you may get favorable prices if you keep going to
Yes.
that same supplier and
Yeah.
show your loyalty. So then that's your kind of secret
Well,
weapon.
I get a little bit frustrated when I see people chopping and changing over a few pounds, for some material.
Yeah,
It's the fact is that they create a good relationship with 2 or 3 core suppliers. Often
yeah,
that supplier will work with them. And exactly the conversation I said about you having with, or me having with my clients, about I'm
yeah,
missing the job for a few pounds. Well,
yeah.
actually, if I go back to the supplier and say, look, we're being squeezed, what can you do? If I've got that relationship and I buy
Mm,
regularly, that supplier has then got a choice. If we use this material, there's a 5%
mm.
saving. Do you think your client would go with that?
The final point is sign trade supplies look to create very strong relationships with their customers, being the supplier. Um, just your thoughts, your final thoughts sort of around that relationship, how important it is, how that plays into you being able to have competitive pricing for your next sign project.
Again, the nice thing about someone like the sign trade supplies is the fact that they create, in effect, demo or examples of the
Mm,
projects that you're going to use. So there are
yeah.
samples that you can take to show your client. So you're not
Mm,
necessarily going in cold. You're not just going in with a drawing. You can go in with a
mm,
material to feel and touch. Now,
mm,
there's a cost involved for that. So again, that
mm,
relationship building is actually the supplier
mhm,
is relying on you to take that product in, and actually, if they're selling that product, you come back to them
mm,
for it. So
mhm,
that's very much where I'm coming from. The other
mm,
thing is actually the knowledge base that they have. I bet when they're asked to quote, the quote
mhm,
is very vague. So they're having to use their expertise to come up with a solution for the sign company.
mm,
Well,
mm,
maybe there's a little educational piece for all of us there. So give
mm,
us some more examples of what you need to give me a slightly
mm.
better price. And actually,
Mm.
then I can then educate my client.
Mhm.
That's where I think
Yeah.
there's a huge advantage of building relationships.